What makes the state of Pennsylvania so special? Known as the Keystone State, Pennsylvania was one of the first 13 colonies, and was the second state to ratify the United States Constitution, on the 12th of December 1787. Pennsylvania is one of the oldest states in the Union, with quite a fascinating history. And, in this video, we will examine that history, along with several interesting facts, stories, and truths about the state of Pennsylvania, some that you may or may not already know. But before we begin, if you like this video, please click the like button, as this helps with the YouTube algorithm. And please subscribe, so you can be the first to see more videos, just like this one. Long before the first white, European settlers arrived in Pennsylvania, archaeologists believed that the first settlements in the area dated back to around 15,000 years ago. It is a bit unclear as to when the first humans actually arrived in the area. But the first true native tribes that were here were the Lenape, the Iroquois, and the Mohawk tribes. Moving forward to the 17th century, the Dutch, the English, and the Swedes claimed land around the Delaware River, with each wanting to have their own colony in the New World. The Dutch were the first to take possession of their lands, settling the Delmarva Peninsula in June 1631. They established the Zwernendale colony, a spot that is now present-day Lewis, Delaware. Then in 1638, Sweden established their new Swedish colony, in the region of Fort Christina, which is now Wilmington, Delaware. In June 1664, King Charles II of England gave James, Duke of York, a grant that incorporated all lands included in the original Virginia Company of Plymouth Grant. But this grant was in conflict with the Dutch claim for New Netherland, which includes a good portion of what is now Pennsylvania. In June 1664, the Duke of York sold his portion of the land grant to John Barclay and George Carteret, so they could create a proprietary colony. At that time, though, the land was not quite in British possession. But what this grant did was to box in parts of the New Netherland region. This act caused conflict between the Dutch and the British, and on the 29th of August 1664, the British began the conquest of New Amsterdam by sending their ships into New York Harbor. The conquest continued until October 1664, when the British captured Fort Casimir, in what is today Newcastle, Delaware. Over the next few years, more conflicts broke out between the Dutch and the British over this valuable piece of land. Throughout these conflicts, possession of the land changed hands a number of times. By the 12th of November 1674, the British finally seized control, and they changed the outline of the borders between Pennsylvania and Delaware. Then on the 28th of February 1681, King Charles granted a land charter to Quaker leader William Penn. The king owed a debt of £16,000 to Penn's father. This is equal to being close to $3 million in today's money. The transaction of land represents one of the largest land grants to any individual in history. Penn proposed this new land be called New Wales, though too many people objected to this idea, so he threw that out. Then he recommended the name to be Sylvania, which is from the Latin word silver, meaning forest or woods. King Charles then decided to call the new land Pennsylvania in honor of William Penn's father. The new colony would then be known as Penn's Woods. This was the origin behind the naming of the colony of Pennsylvania. The younger Penn wasn't keen about naming the colony Pennsylvania. He felt that everyone would think it was named after him and his family. He pleaded to King Charles to change the name, but Charles refused to do so, and so the name stuck. Penn then established his government, using two innovations he developed, and that were soon copied throughout the New World. The first innovation was creating a county commission, and the second innovation was establishing freedom of religious conviction. When Penn instituted his colonial government on the 4th of March 1681, he signed a peace treaty with Tenanand, the leader of the Lenape. This began a long period of friendly relations with the Quakers and the native peoples. Many more treaties were made between the Quakers and the other tribes of the area, and while Penn was in charge of his colony, none of those treaties were violated. Things remained relatively good for the fledgling colony. The first major war to take place in the colonies is now what is commonly known as the French and Indian War. The war was touched off in southwestern Pennsylvania in May 1754, when men, led by a young officer by the name of George Washington, along with his Native American associate, Tanaka Ryson, ambushed a French party that was sent to warn against British advancement into the forks of the Ohio, which is the site of Pittsburgh today. When British General Edward Braddock tried to reach the Forks the following year, he was killed by the French army, and the British forces were forced to retreat. The war raged on for a few years, and then in 1758, the British forces expelled the French from Fort Duquesne and the Ohio country. In 1763, the war officially ended with France ceding Canada and its territory east of the Mississippi River to Britain. The 7 Years' War, though starting in Pennsylvania, affected all of the colonies. It was an expensive war for Britain. It seemed that Britain had no choice but to impose higher taxes throughout the American colonies to help pay the cost of this war. These new taxes were not welcomed at all by the colonists, and they only kept getting more and more oppressive. After the Stamp Act of 1765, John Dickinson of Philadelphia wrote the Declaration of Rights and Grievances. All of the 13 colonies decided to convene, at the request of the Massachusetts Assembly. They gathered together in Philadelphia, between the 2nd of December 1767 and the 15th of February 1768. They aired their grievances and tried to work out solutions. But the taxation from King George only got more unreasonable. They soon realized that more had to be done. Then in 1774, 12 of the colonies, Georgia was the only colony not in attendance, sent delegates to meet at Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia. They met from September the 5th, 1774, through to the 24th of October, 1774. This meeting was called after the British Navy instituted a blockade of Boston Harbor, and Parliament passed the punitive Intolerable Acts in response to the December 1773 Boston Tea Party. The Intolerable Acts were 4 acts that took away self-governance and rights that Massachusetts had enjoyed since its founding. The delegates conducted a spirited discussion on how the colonies could collectively respond to the British government's coercive actions, and together they wanted to develop a reasonable solution to the difficulties. Some in the group wanted to effect a reconciliation between the colonies and Great Britain, while others wanted to establish independence from the king. They wanted to develop a decisive statement of their rights and liberties in the colonies. They wanted to end the abuses of parliamentary authority and retain the rights they felt were guaranteed under the colonial charters and the English Constitution. The First Continental Congress ultimately drafted a petition to the king asking for peace, but also threatening a boycott of British goods if the Intolerable Acts were not withdrawn. The British responded to the petition with a show of force, with the Battle of Lexington on the 19th of April 1775, which started the American Revolution against the British. All 13 colonies showed up to the Second Continental Congress, which met again in Philadelphia in May 1775. It was during this period that the delegates agreed to establish their independence, and when they all signed the Declaration of Independence. The first place that the Declaration of Independence was read was at the State House Yard in Philadelphia on the 8th of July 1776. It was read by Colonel John Nixon, and following this event, the celebrations marking the Declaration of Independence continued long into the night in Philadelphia. After America won the war against the British, and after the United States was established, the decision was made to create a constitution, to make it the law of the land. Philadelphia was once again chosen to be the cradle of the new nation. The delegates convened at the Pennsylvania State House, which is now known as Independence Hall, to work through the creation of the United States Constitution. Pennsylvania then became the second state to ratify the Constitution. Philadelphia was the first capital city of the new United States, only to lose that distinction when Washington, D.C. was finished. Pennsylvania continued to play a significant role in the history of the country. The state also played an important role in the Civil War, with probably the most decisive battle of the war being fought at Gettysburg. And post-Civil War, the Industrial Revolution really took hold in Pennsylvania with titans of industry such as Andrew Carnegie, who founded Carnegie Steel, Charles Schwab, who founded Bethlehem Steel, Milton Hershey, who created the Hershey Chocolate Company, and H.J. Heinz, who founded the Heinz Food Processing Company, all starting their massive businesses in the state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has remained a vital force within the country. It is still a state that holds much sway and power. Here are just some more facts about this important and interesting state that you may or may not already know. The original American flag was made in Philadelphia. There is some folklore to this story though. It is said that Betsy Ross of Philadelphia was the person who made the first American flag. Ross made flags for the Pennsylvania Navy during the American Revolution. She also made U.S. flags for over 50 years. The first time that Betsy Ross's name became synonymous with being the woman that created the first American flag was during the country's centennial in 1876. Ross's grandson William J. Canby presented a research paper to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, in which he claimed that his grandmother was the person that made the first flag of the United States. He stated that he obtained this information from his aunt, Clarissa Sinde Wilson, in 1857, a tidbit that came about around 20 years after Betsy Ross's death. Canby dates the historic episode based on Washington's journey to Philadelphia in the late spring of 1776, a year before the Second Continental Congress passed the first Flag Act of the 14th of June 1777. His story appealed to Americans who were at that time eager for stories about the Revolution. Betsy Ross was promoted as a patriotic role model for young girls, and was a symbol of the contributions of women during the American Revolution. Even though there is a dispute as to whether she was the original creator of the American flag, Betsy Ross did, in fact, play a role in that period. From 1894 to 1908, the Philadelphia City Hall was the tallest building in the world. It was built in the Second Empire style, and it cost $24 million to build. The tower was completed by 1894. It was designed to be the world's tallest building, but that was surpassed by the construction of the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., and the Eiffel Tower in Paris. The City Hall was the first secular building to hold the distinction of tallest building, as up to that point, all of the previously tallest buildings were religious structures. The Port of Philadelphia was established more than 300 years ago during the colonial period. It was for a long while the busiest port in the colonies, and stayed that way for a time, after the establishment of the United States. It was finally eclipsed by the Port of New York in the 20th century. Benjamin Franklin, one of Pennsylvania's most famous citizens, spent much of his life in Philadelphia. While a citizen of Philadelphia, he started these firsts: the first postal service in the United States, the first library system, the first zoo, and the first lightning rod. Benjamin Franklin's grave in Philadelphia is a popular place to visit. It is visible through an iron gate on the southeast corner of 5th and Arch Streets. Pennies dot his tombstone, as placing them on his tombstone is a local tradition. For the practice of tossing pennies onto Ben Franklin's grave is said to bring luck to the penitosser. The first piano to be built in America was by John Brent, who immigrated to Philadelphia from London in 1770. He immediately set up a shop to create musical instruments. He was the first to introduce this instrument to the New World. The City Hotel in Sunbury was the first building in the world to be commercially wired and lit up by the incandescent electric light, through Thomas Edison's three-wire system. Edison completed this historical endeavor on the 4th of July 1883. After inventing the first practical incandescent electric light bulb in 1879, Edison went on a search for a place to build a central system that could generate, transmit, and distribute electric power. He first picked a location on Pearl Street in Manhattan, but he decided that this wasn't right for what he needed to do. Edison then searched for a small town to illuminate, and a business associate of his suggested Sunbury. The town was near coal fields, which was a convenient fuel source to power boilers, so this made the little town an attractive place to introduce an alternative energy source. Edison began the construction of a central station in Sunbury in the spring of 1883. His plan was to illuminate the entire town, and so he connected wires from the plant, along the streets, using overhead wires. Houses and businesses throughout the city were wired with Edison's new technology. The first building in the town to be powered up by the light was the City Hotel, and this was on the 4th of July. The entire town came out to see the spectacle, and after seeing what his light could do, the entire town was lit up by Edison's incandescent lights. Other towns soon followed Sunbury. The first daily newspaper in the United States was the Pennsylvania Packet and Daily Advertiser. It began its first publication on the 21st of September 1784. Newspapers up to this point were only printed on a weekly or monthly basis. The first commercial radio station in the country was KDKA of Pittsburgh. It transmitted its first broadcast on the 2nd of November 1920. The radio station broadcast the live returns of the Harding-Cox presidential election, with the announcement of Warren Harding as the winner of that election. The U.S. Mint in Philadelphia was the first building erected under constitutional order. As Philadelphia was chosen as the country's first capital, the building was set to be placed there. It was built in 1792. The Philadelphia Mint is the oldest manufacturer of coins in the United States. Pennsylvania Hospital was the nation's first hospital. It was founded in Philadelphia in 1751 by Benjamin Franklin and Dr. Thomas Bond. It is still very much a part of the Philadelphia community and is part of the Penn Medicine Hospital system. The first row houses began in Philadelphia on what is now Sansom Street, in Center City. Row houses were built to fit all levels of taste and budgets. They were easy to build on narrow lots and were very affordable. Because of their pervasiveness, this resulted in Philadelphia becoming the city of homes by the end of the 19th century. Philadelphia becomes synonymous with row houses, and this type of housing was held up as an example of the best way to house all kinds of citizens. Other cities followed Philadelphia's example, including New York City, Baltimore, Providence, and Washington, D.C., all of whom decided that Philadelphia's row houses were the best way to solve the problems of housing demand, steep land prices, and narrow lots. From the start, Philadelphia was meant to be a city of religious tolerance. William Penn envisioned a place where no one would be persecuted for their religious affiliation. He also wanted to live in harmony with the native peoples, paying them for the right to the city's land. This is why he called the city of Philadelphia the city of brotherly love. Philadelphia was the birthplace of the abolitionist movement. In February 1688, the Quakers of Germantown protested the traffic of men's bodies. In 1775, Quaker activist Anthony Benezet called the first meeting of abolitionists, in a meeting of the Pennsylvania Society for Promoting the Abolition of Slavery and the Relief of Free Negroes. In 1787, Benjamin Franklin and Benjamin Rush joined the group and helped to write its constitution. In 1790, Franklin urged the United States Congress to ban the terrible practice. But Franklin's pleas went unheeded until after the Civil War. The Philadelphia Thanksgiving Day Parade, which started in 1920, is considered the oldest Thanksgiving Day parade in the country. It was sponsored by Gumbel's department store. The department store used more than 50 store employees, with each dressed in costumes, to walk on the streets during that first parade. The parade had floats and marching bands, and was the first Thanksgiving Day parade to present Santa Claus at the end of the parade. Speaking of department store firsts, Wanamaker's of Philadelphia purchased the largest playable instrument, better known as the Wanamaker Grand Court Organ, which was originally presented at the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis, Missouri. The organ was famed for its orchestra-like sound. It was built with exceptional craftsmanship and is considered an art organ. It remains a highlight of the Center City store, which eventually became a Macy's store in 2006. The first iron chain suspension bridge in the Western world was the Jacobs Creek Bridge in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania. It was built in 1801 and designed by inventor James Finley. The first wire cable suspension bridge was the Spider Bridge at Fall of Schuylkill, just north of Philadelphia. Though a modest and temporary structure, the Spider Bridge was thought to be the first wire cable suspension bridge in the world. It opened in 1816 and closed a year later in 1817. The Rockville Stone Arch Bridge in Harrisburg is 3,820 feet long and 52 feet wide, and is believed to be the longest and widest stone arch railroad bridge in the world. The first computer was the giant ENIAC machine, or also known as the Electrical Numerical Integrator and Calculator, which was created by John W. Morchley and J. Presper Eckert at the University of Pennsylvania in February 1946. It used a word of 10 decimal digits instead of binary ones, like previous automated calculators and computers. It also used over 18,000 vacuum tubes and punch cards. The Pennsylvania Amish community in Lancaster County is the oldest and largest Amish community in the United States, numbering over 30,000. In fact, Pennsylvania Dutch is the third most spoken language in the state. Pennsylvania is the only original colony not to touch the Atlantic Ocean. Its nickname, Keystone State, was given because of Pennsylvania's geographical location among the original 13 colonies. A keystone is a stone on which other stones depend upon for support. Because of Pennsylvania's location around the other 13 colonies, and ultimately how it was the political cornerstone of the colonies, the nickname seemed to fit the state quite aptly. Before the New York Stock Exchange, the first stock exchange was established in Philadelphia in 1790. It started when the Philadelphia Board of Brokers was formed. The brokers were an informal exchange already doing business for years. The Philadelphia Stock Exchange raised money to fund public works around the city of Philadelphia, and also provided financial capital for many early American businesses, including the first Bank of the United States. The worst nuclear accident in the United States happened on the 28th of March 1979 at the 3 Mile Island nuclear facility near Harrisburg. The accident began with failures in the non-nuclear secondary system, followed by a stuck-open pilot-operated relief valve in the primary system. The mechanical failures were compounded by the initial failure of plant operators to recognize the situation as dire. They were poorly trained for such a situation. And there were many design flaws in the facility that helped exacerbate the situation. The cleanup started in August 1979 and took over 14 years to complete, finally ending in December 1993. Another terrible tragedy that happened in the state occurred in Johnstown. On the 28th of May 1889, the series of events in this tragedy started when a low-pressure weather system formed over the Midwest, near Nebraska and Kansas, bringing with it heavy rain. 2 days later, this weather system reached western Pennsylvania, developing into what became some of the heaviest rainfall that had been recorded in that part of the United States at that time. The Army Signal Corps estimated that 6 to 10 inches of rain fell in a 24-hour period. During the night, small creeks became roaring torrents of water, with that water subsequently ripping out trees and causing havoc. Telegraph lines were down from the heavy rain, and rail lines were washed away. By daybreak, the Conemaugh River that ran through Johnstown was about to overwhelm its banks. The South Fork Dam, which was built by Henry Frick of Carnegie Steel, was built above a reservoir. It had been built in order to create a private resort lake for the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. This exclusive resort lake was used specifically only for the wealthy associates of Frick and his group of Pittsburgh speculators, mainly for fishing, boating, and other water sports. During the construction of the dam, Frick insisted that the South Fork Dam be lowered, in order to allow the top of it to have a road, and for other uses. They lowered the dam by 3 feet. By doing this unnecessary alteration to the dam, it increased its vulnerability. The speculators then built cottages and a clubhouse, creating the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club and Mountain Retreat. On the morning of the 31st of May 1889, Elias Unger, president of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, woke up to the sight of the Lake Conemaugh River swollen from the heavy rain. It was still raining heavily in the morning, and it didn't appear that it would let up anytime soon. The water was about to crest the South Fork Dam. Unger tried to gather a group of men to save the dam. The idea was to let water out of the lake, to prevent it from cresting. But they had no success in this effort. John Park, an engineer at South Fork, considered cutting through the dam's end to create a new spillway, but ultimately decided against it, as that would have ensured the dam's failure. Unger then tried to warn the citizens of Johnstown, wanting them to evacuate their town as soon as possible. But no one in Johnstown heeded this warning. For, in the past, when they heard other similar warnings of an impending dam breach, it always came to nothing. So, no one felt there was any danger of the dam breaching. By 1:30 p.m., it was deemed that all attempts to save the dam were futile, and it was about to collapse. Unger ordered everyone to higher ground. By 2:50 p.m., the dam failed. Water rushed over the dam in a torrent, and as it reached Johnstown, it picked up debris such as trees, houses, and animals. It hit the Conemaugh Viaduct, causing it to collapse. The force of the flood was so great that no structure, no topsoil, and no subsoil was left, just the bedrock. The Great Flood took out many towns before reaching Johnstown. It was 57 minutes after the dam collapsed that the flood finally reached Johnstown. Residents were caught by surprise by the massive water rushing towards them, at speeds of 40 miles per hour, reaching a height of nearly 60 feet. Many people were crushed by pieces of debris, and others became caught in barbed wire from the wire factory that was located upstream, while others drowned. Several townspeople managed to survive by reaching attics or roofs, or holding onto floating debris. They waited for hours for any help to arrive. By the end, over 2,208 people died. This was one of the largest losses of civilian life in the United States at that time. This number was only surpassed by the devastating Galveston, Texas hurricane in 1900 and the 9/11 attacks in 2001. On a much lighter note, Some of the most famous inventions made in the state of Pennsylvania include these great and popular items. Crayola crayons were invented in the Lehigh Valley, with the first crayon coming off the assembly line in 1903. George Washington Gale Ferris Jr., an engineer working in the railroad industry in Pittsburgh, created the world's first Ferris wheel. He designed the Ferris wheel to be used for the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. Hyman Lipman combined a graphite pencil with a rubber eraser, creating this new type of pencil while living in Philadelphia. He applied for a patent for his brilliant design in 1868. Dr. Jonas Salk, who was working as a researcher at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, successfully created a vaccine for the deadly and dreaded polio virus. He completed his achievement in 1955, basically eradicating the terrible disease that ravaged the country for so many decades. The smiley face emoticon, which is the most well-known of all emoticons, and was instrumental in expanding the world of digital communications, was created by Professor Scott E. Fahlman of Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. In 1905, motion pictures were still relatively new. During that year, John Harris and Harry Davis opened the very first 96-seat Nickelodeon theater in the country, in Pittsburgh, and with it, they made entertainment history. They charged only 5 cents, or 1 nickel per show, with each show lasting 15 minutes. Another story regarding entertainment firsts concerns the Warner Brothers, who got their start in films when they leased the Cascade Theatre in Newcastle from 1906 to 1907. They promised the finest class of moving picture art, with fine music at all times. They would give every woman who came to the theatre a carnation to wear. Sam Warner would work the hand-cranked picture machine, while Jack Warner entertained the crowd with a song before each show. The patrons would watch the picture shows on borrowed chairs that came from a nearby funeral home. The Warner Brothers would have to return the chairs anytime there was a funeral. The theatre still stands, and you can visit it if you are ever in the Newcastle area. In Pittsburgh, in 1913, the first drive-in gas station opened. At that time, automobiles were still kind of a novelty and not everyone had one, but they were quickly becoming more affordable and popular with the invention of Henry Ford's Model A automobile. The gas station was a Gulf station, located at the corner of Bourne Boulevard and St. Clair Street in Pittsburgh. The pagoda-style brick building offered free air, water, crankcase service, and tire and tube installation. The toy Slinky was invented and developed by American naval engineer Richard T. James in 1943. James demonstrated his toy at Gumbell's department store in Philadelphia in November 1945. The toy was an instant hit, and still is a very popular toy to this day. Walter Diemer, an accountant at the Fleer Chewing Gum Company in Philadelphia, was experimenting with new gum recipes. He created one that was less sticky than regular chewing gum, stretched more easily, and where a person could blow air through it to create bubbles. The gum was named Double Bubble, and the bubble gum he created was an immediate success and is as popular as ever. The great industrialist, Andrew Carnegie, started his career as a telegraph operator and eventually worked on the railroad, making his fortune in the railroad industry. While working for the railroad, he realized the need for ironworks as a new type of building material. His concept would help spur forward the Industrial Revolution. Carnegie sunk his investments into his ironworks business, as he supplied this new and heavy-duty building material, first to use for building railroad bridges, and eventually for building all kinds of structures, such as high-rise office buildings. Carnegie was instrumental in creating the steel industry, and for subsequently putting Pittsburgh on the map as one of the top industrial cities in the country. Henry John Heinz began his career as a producer of horseradish in Sharpsburg. But after his horseradish business failed, he began tinkering around, creating a new kind of condiment, one he called tomato ketchup. His product was an immediate success, and his new condiment business flourished. Heinz soon became the top maker of tomato ketchup and other condiments. Heinz is still tops in the food processing business, with tomato ketchup still being its top seller. Milton Hershey was trained in the confection business. He made caramel using fresh milk. He opened the Lancaster Caramel Company in Lancaster, Pennsylvania in 1883. The company grew to over 1,300 employees. After traveling to the World Exposition in Chicago, Hershey became interested in chocolate. He sold his caramel company and started Hershey's Chocolate in 1900. In March 1903, Hershey opened his new manufacturing plant near Derry Township, which he completed in 1905. The famous factory is now located in Hershey, Pennsylvania, the town he built for his employees, and now is a very popular tourist attraction. Pennsylvania has an abundance of famous people. Here are just a few. Frankie Avalon. Kevin Bacon. Actress Carol Baker. Actor George Bancroft. Famous acting family Ethel, John, and Lionel Barrymore. Billy Barty. Comedian Joey Bishop. Peter Boyle. Comedian David Brenner. Charles Brinson. Dennis Christopher. Brian Patrick Clark. Bradley Cooper. Ellen Corby. Bill Cosby. Actor Broderick Crawford. James Darren. John Davidson. And B. Davis. Bruce Davidson. John Delancey. Kim Delaney. Kat Demmings. Lisa Eichhorn. Comedian Tina Fey. W.C. Fields. Matthew Fox. Jonathan Frakes. Actress Janet Gaynor. Richard Gere. Scott Glenn. Jeff Goldblum. Comedian Frank Gorshin. Seth Green. Jonathan Groff. Veronica Harmel. Comedian Kevin Hart. Sherman Hemsley. Lauren Holly. Shirley Jones. Comedian Tim Kazurinsky. Michael Keaton. Gene Kelly. Grace Kelly. Michael Kelly. Comedian Jamie Kennedy. Daniel Day Kim. Taylor Kinney. Jack Klugman. Nancy Culp. Brothers Andrew, Joey, and Matthew Lawrence. Actress Jeanette MacDonald. Jane Mansfield. Comedian Jackie Mason. Elaine May. Mary McDonnell. Adolph Menjou. Writer James A. Mishina. Comedian Dennis Miller. Jason Miller. Cameron Mitchell. Tom Mix. Comedian Shuri Oteri. Jerry Orbach. Jack Palance. Stuart Pankin. Adrian Pastor. Robert Picardo. Billy Porter. William Powell. Zachary Quinto. Holly Robinson Peete. Fred Rogers. George A. Romero. Bob Saget. David O. Says Nick. Amanda Seyfried. M. Night Shyamalan. Will Smith. Jimmy Stewart. Sharon Stone. Singer Taylor Swift. Actress Holland Taylor. Teller of Penn and Teller. Actor Miles Teller. Jonathan Taylor Thomas. Comedian Paul F. Tompkins. Brendan Walsh. Actor Fritz Weaver. Artist Andy Warhol. Painters Jamie Wyeth and Andrew Wyeth. Photographer Bunny Yagler. Astronaut Pete Conrad. Race car drivers Marco and Michael Andretti. Baseball player Roy Campanella. Football coach Bill Cowher. Tony Dorsett. Stan Musial. Ken Griffey Sr. and Ken Griffey Jr. Football player John Heisman. Boxer Larry Holmes. Baseball player Reggie Jackson. Basketball coach George Karl. Tommy Lasorda. Figure skaters Tara Lipinski and Johnny Ware. Golfer Arnold Palmer. Mike Piazza. Football player Jim Thorpe. Joe Walton. Author Dean Koontz. Author David McCullough. Ezra Pound. Gertrude Stein. Author John Updike. Joseph Wambor. Director Chris Columbus. Director Lee Daniels. Brian De Palma. Sidney Lumet. Peter Farrelly. Christina Aguilera. Singer Marian Anderson. Lou Christie. Musician John Coltrane. Perry Como. Jim Croce. Band leaders Jimmy and Tommy Dorsey. Esteban. Kevin Eubanks. Singer Daryl Hall. Don Hartman. Donnie Iris. DJ Jazzy Jeff. Singer Mario Lanza. Joan Jett. Wiz Khalifa. Patti Label. Bret Michaels. Pink. Teddy Pendergrass, Questlove, Todd Rundgren, Bobby Rydell, Bobby Vinton. Author, Louisa May Alcott. Author, Pearl S. Buck. Composer, Oscar Hammerstein II. Politician, Newt Gingrich. Alexander Haig. General, Winfield Scott Hancock. Senator, Orrin Hatch. George Marshall. H.R. McMaster. Benjamin Netanyahu. Rand and Ron Paul. Robert Reich. Ed Rendell. Tom Ridge. Game show host, Chuck Barris. Financial analyst, Jim Cramer. Journalist, Chris Matthews. Journalist, Jake Tapper. Philosopher, Noam Chomsky. Anthropologist, Margaret Mead. President James Buchanan. President Joe Biden. And frontiersman, Daniel Boone. Thanks again for watching this episode of What Makes the State of Pennsylvania So Special. If I missed anything, or if you want to share your own interesting facts about the state of Pennsylvania, please leave a comment below. And please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Also, please look out for more videos like this one. We intend to highlight all 50 states and US territories. So, stay tuned for more videos, and please share them with your friends. Thanks again, and see you soon.